Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we have a Commander's Guild deck. It's all for one and one for all, and if you haven't seen this before, what we're doing is we are randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com and we are building a Commander deck for Magic the Gathering with a budget of less than $100 and working with a theme of our chosen card. This week, our chosen card was a little bit of a throwback. It is Icatian Javelineers. It's a 1-mana 1/1 human soldier that enters the battlefield with a javelin counter on it, and we can tap it to remove a javelin counter from Icatian Javelineers, and then it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So originally, when we got this card, I was going to make something like a weird counters deck, trying to find counters that were super unique, and maybe playing around with that, but I quickly realized that a lot of unique counters tended to be on older cards, which bumped up the price quite a bit, and the deck very quickly became out of our budget range. So instead, I went with something a little bit different, and our first card that led us down this direction was actually our commander, who is going to be Rhys the Redeemed. So he's a 1-mana 1/1 elf. We can pay 3, tap him, and create a 1/1 green and white elf warrior creature token, or we can pay 6 and tap him to, for each creature token that we control, create a token that's a copy of that creature. Now, Rhys and Icatian Javelineers don't work along super well, but the one thing they do have in common is that they're both 1 mana. So what I did is I went through and we built a Selesnya deck, a green and white deck, and there is not a single card in the entire deck that costs more or less than 1 mana. Everything is exactly 1 mana value. And so, believe it or not, there are actually some themes that we were able to piece together with this odd deck that we're putting together. The first one is a bit of a token synergy. Rhys and this card here, Ovia Pashiri Sage Lifecrafter. She's a legendary creature human artificer for 1 power, 2 toughness. You can pay 3, tap her to make a 1/1 servo, or pay 5 and tap her to make an XX colorless construct artifact creature token, where X is the number of creatures we control. So we're able to have a bunch of token generators, and even though most of our, well, I say most of, all of our stuff costs 1 mana, we're able to have abilities that cost more mana, making it so that we can use our mana later in the game and still keep up with the rest of the table. The second major theme we have is 1/1 counters. Because we're starting with such small creatures, we want to be able to make sure that our small creatures can eventually compete with other people's big threats. So we have things like Predatory Hunger, which is an enchantment, and whenever an opponent successfully casts a creature spell, we put a +1/+1 counter on the enchanted creature, meaning that we can have something small, like Ovia, that eventually becomes a massive threat. And the last major theme of this deck is going to be in creatures that affect the board state. So the big one that I'm going to point out is Permeating Mass, where whenever Permeating Mass deals combat damage to a creature, that creature becomes a copy of Permeating Mass. So we want to have ways that affect the board state. We want to have ways to interact with our opponents, and we do have a ton of ways to do that with 1 mana. Permeating Mass is a great removal spell. If someone attacks into us with a very big, important creature, we can just block, turn it into a 1/3, problem solved. That also means we get access to things like Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, ways of destroying or exiling and removing our opponent's creatures, and hopefully staying in control of what's happening on the board. Now, to go along with some of our themes, we do have some key cards that we would love to get on the battlefield at some point during the game. The first one, Mikaeus the Lunarch. Now, he doesn't necessarily look like a 1 mana creature, but the cost of X and a white means that he is officially a 1 mana value creature. And he is a legendary creature human cleric for a 0/0, and he enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. So if we spend 3 mana, we have 2 into the X and 1 white, he comes in as a 2 power creature, and he can tap to put a +1/+1 counter on himself, or tap to remove a +1/+1 counter from himself, and put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature we control. So if we're going super wide with our tokens, we're able to drop Mikaeus, pump up the whole team, hopefully pump them up multiple times over the course of a couple of turns, and turn what was a small token army into a massive threat, hopefully knocking someone out of the game. Another key card for us is Secure the Wastes, which kind of goes along with Mikaeus. It's another X and a white card, this time for an instant, where we put X 1/1 white warrior creature tokens onto the battlefield. So we can hold up, say 6 mana at the end of our opponent's turn. We cast Secure the Waste, X equals 5, we make 5 1/1s. We can then use something like Mikaeus to tap, put a counter on them, and all of a sudden, we have a massive board of big creatures, well, big for us, they're 2/2s, that wasn't there before, presenting a massive threat to our opponents who might not have seen this coming. And our last major key card is the Herald of Anafenza. It's a 1 mana, 1/2 with Outlast for 2 and a white, which means we can pay 2 and a white, tap it, and put a 1/1 counter on it. But whenever we activate Herald of Anafenza's Outlast ability, we put a 1/1 white warrior creature token onto the battlefield. So we're able to pump up one creature, put 1/1 counters on it, while also making tokens, playing into both of our major strategies. So we've got our themes, we've got our key cards. Now we're going to take a look at some cool interactions that we found while putting this deck together. So the first one is between Alliance of Arms and Might of the Masses. So we have Alliance of Arms, which is to join forces. So starting with us, each player may pay any amount of mana. Each player puts X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens onto the battlefield, where X is the total amount of mana paid this way. And the second card is Might of the Masses, where target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each creature you control. Now, we do have some ways of sneaking through some attacks. We have some evasion in here. But the big goal with this is to cast Alliance of Arms, hopefully have the whole table pay into it, make a massive board of creatures, and then just kind of poke in at one of our opponents for 1 damage, cast a Might of the Masses, and maybe give a creature +10/+10, +15/+15, and just knock someone out of the game right there. And another cool interaction is between Ginger Brute and Scale Up. So Ginger Brute, 1, works very well in the last combo we mentioned. He's a 1/1 with haste, and we can pay 1 mana, and he can't be blocked except by creatures with haste. And we can pay 2, tap him, sacrifice him to gain 3 life. So we can make him mostly unblockable if need be. And then we have Scale Up, which is a 1 mana sorcery. Until end of turn, target creature you control becomes a green worm with base power and toughness 6/4. So we can make the Ginger Brute mostly unblockable, turn it into a 6/4, and just smack someone. We can use this to kill planeswalkers, we can use this to get in little bits of damage. And if we have made a whole bunch of tokens and we really need to go off with Scale Up, it also has Overload for 4 green, where instead of turning target creature into a 6/4, we turn all of our creatures into 6/4s. So we can massively overrun our opponents with our board of tokens. So that's the general idea of the deck. In terms of the actual budget for the deck, we ran really close to our limit. We hit $99.36, so we are very, very close to that top end. And a lot of it is due in part to including a lot of $4 to $5 cards, but our most expensive card in the entire deck is actually Skull Clamp, which is sitting around $7.54 for the equipment. That says equipped creature gets +1/-1, and whenever equipped creature is put into a graveyard, we draw 2 cards, and then it equips for 1. So, since we're a token strategy, we're able to equip Skull Clamp to one of our little 1/1s and immediately draw 2 cards, basically letting us sacrifice a creature for 1 mana to draw 2 cards, which is super efficient, very useful, especially if we're able to pump out tons and tons of tokens. This is definitely an all-star in the deck. However, if you are looking to cut the budget down, this gets it down by, $7.50, so it is something you can cut. It's not necessary. And I think the last thing we got to do with this deck, though, is figure out how exactly it plays against other decks, right? We've got 1 mana cards throughout the entire deck. Nothing costs more than 1, so it's a little bit underpowered when it comes to most tables, I'd imagine. So we are going to give it a shot, and we'll see how we do. And in this case, our 3 opponents are quite a scary group of opponents. We have Dina Soul Steeper, the 2-mana 1/3 that says whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life, and she can sacrifice another creature to get +X/+O until end of turn, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. We have Yarok the Desecrated, the 3/5 Death Touch lifelink that doubles enter the battlefield effects. And we have Verena Lich Queen, the Zombie Wizard, 4/4, that whenever you attack with 1 or more zombies, you draw that many cards, then discard that many cards, and gain that much life, and you can exile 2 cards from your graveyard to make a zombie. So Dina is being played by my fiancée Lena, Yarok is being played by Bilal, and Verena is being played by Shawn. So I've played against Lena's Dina deck before. It's quite the powerhouse. It's mostly the precon, but it does have some upgrades, and I'm a little worried about her being able to gain life super quickly. Yarok is incredibly powerful. Being able to double up, enter the battlefield, triggers some ETBs is incredibly strong, and Bilal's deck specifically tries to run off of making infinite mana, so that is definitely something to keep an eye out for. And Shawn's Verena deck is a very powerful zombie strategy. He wants to put a bunch of creatures on board and start swinging, and typically zombies tend to be 2/2s, which are bigger than our 1-mana 1/1s, so we gotta get some counters going if we're gonna withstand the zombie assault. But we'll see how it goes. Hopefully we can put up some good numbers. Hopefully we can win a game, and we'll see how our 1-mana value deck does. But I hope you guys enjoy it, and I will talk to you guys after the game. At the start of the game, Lena goes first, followed by Bilal, Shawn, and then myself. On turn 1, Lena plays a High Market. Bilal plays a Polluted Delta and then cracks it for a Breeding Pool. Shawn plays a Swamp and casts Crypt Breaker. I play a Plains and cast Rhys the Redeemed. Lena plays a Swamp. Bilal plays a Windswept Heath, cracks it for a Forest, and then casts Coiling Oracle. This allows him to put a Vendilion Click to hand. Shawn plays a Temple of Silence, scrying 1, and casts Library of Lang, allowing him to put discarded cards on top of his library. I play a Forest and cast Scute Mob before attacking Lena for 1. Lena plays a Forest, and then casts her commander, Dina Soul Steeper. Bilal plays a Watery Grave untapped, taking 2 damage. Shawn plays a Swamp, and then casts Commander's Sphere. I play a Forest, Lena plays a Swamp, and then at the end of her turn, Bilal flashes in Vendilion Click to look at Shawn's hand. This reveals an Orzhov Guildgate, Tormod the Desecrator, Lord of the Accursed, and an Arcane Signet. Looking at his options, Bilal has him put the Lord on the bottom of his library and then draw a card. Bilal then plays a Swamp. Shawn plays an Orzhov Guildgate and casts Arcane Signet, followed up by Lord of the Undead, giving all his zombies +1/+1. And at the end of his turn, I activate our commander Rhys to make a 1/1 Elf Warrior token. Then I untap and I play a Forest and cast Hungering Hydra, putting 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Lena plays a Forest and casts Epicure of Blood, doing 1 damage to each opponent whenever she gains a life. Bilal plays a Swamp and then casts his commander Yarok the Desecrated, but I counter it with a Mana Tithe. He then decides to attack me for 3 with the Click. Shawn casts a Corpse Knight, which does 1 damage to each opponent whenever he has a creature enter the battlefield, and then casts his commander, Verena Lich Queen, triggering Corpse Knight. He moves to combat, attacking Bilal for 4, drawing 2, discarding 2, which go on top of his library thanks to Library of Lang, and gaining 2 life with Verena's ability. On my turn, I attack Bilal for 2, and pass. Lena plays a Rogue's Passage, and then casts Professor Onyx, and activates her +1 ability to lose a life and look at the top 3 cards of her deck, putting one to hand and the others into the graveyard. Bilal plays a swamp, and then casts Mulldrifter, drawing 2 cards. Shawn plays a swamp, and then casts Teferi's Ageless Insight, which draws him double the cards whenever he draws, and it's not his draw step. He then attacks me with everything, drawing 8 cards, discarding 4, and gaining 4 life. Before the blocks, I create an elf with Rhys and double block on the Lord of the Undead to kill it. Then I take 10 damage. And in his second main phase, Shawn casts Orzhov's Signet and Dreadhorde Invasion, which lets him amass on each of his upkeeps and lose a life. I play a Plains and cast Swallow Whole, exiling Verena and tapping my Hydra, putting a +1/+1 counter on it. Lena plays a Temple of the False Gods and casts Alhammarret's Archive, doubling her life gain and card draw. She then activates Onyx's +1 ability, losing a life, putting a card to hand and 2 to the graveyard. Bilal plays an island, casts a Soul Ring, recasts his commander Yarok, which allows him to double all of his enter the battlefield effects. Shawn plays a swamp and then amasses on upkeep, making a zombie army token, and triggering Corpse Knight, and he then casts a Grave Titan, making 2 zombies, triggering Corpse Knight 3 more times, and then casts a Grave Crawler, triggering Corpse Knight again. At the end of his turn, though, I activate Rhys, making an elf. In my upkeep, I put 4 +1/+1 counters on Scute Mob since I have 5 lands, and cast Permeating Mass. Lena casts a Blossoming Bog Beast and activates Professor Onyx's +1 to put a card to hand. On Bilal's turn, he attacks Professor Onyx for 3, and then in his second main phase, casts Omniscience, letting him cast his spells for free. In response, Shawn taps his board to draw 2 cards with Cryptbreaker, but doesn't find an answer, so the spell resolves. Bilal then casts Palancron and attempts to make infinite mana by untapping his lands, but I fizzle the combo by casting Path to Exile on Palancron while the trigger is still on the stack, exiling the card. Bilal then untaps 7 lands, and follows that up with a Cavalier of Gales, drawing 3 cards and putting 2 on top of his library. He then casts a Nissa Vastwood Seer, putting 2 forests to hand and playing 1 for turn, which transforms her into Nissa Sage Animist. He then activates her +1, revealing a Talisman of Resilience, putting it to hand, casting Una, Queen of the Fae, casting the Talisman, casting a Noxious Gearhulk, destroying Grave Titan and Scute Mob, gaining 11 total life, and passes. At the end of his turn, though, Shawn activates Cryptbreaker, making a zombie token, triggering Corpse Knight, and then on his turn casts Utter End, exiling Omniscience. In response, Bilal activates Una, choosing black, exiling the top 8 cards of Shawn's deck, and making a fairy for each black card, hitting 3. Shawn then casts a Wayward Servant, draining his opponents for 1 whenever a zombie enters the battlefield, casts an Undead Augur, doing 2 to everyone, and at the end of turn, I activate Rhys, making another elf. On my turn, I cast Alliance of Arms, making everyone on the board 9 soldier tokens, thanks to everyone paying into it, which also triggers Corpse Knight 9 times. Lena plays a Sap Seep Forest, casts a Pest Summoning, making 2 pests, casts a Blight Mound, giving her pests +1/+0 and Menace, and making a pest whenever a non-token creature dies, and then attacks Shawn with 9 soldiers and the Blossoming Bog Beast. On attacks, the Bog Beast triggers, gaining Lena 4 life, giving her entire team +4/+4 and trample, then triggering Dina and the Epicure, doing 2 damage to each opponent. Shawn blocks as much as possible, killing the Bog Beast and some soldiers, tapping his zombies to draw 16 cards before taking 39 damage and going to 2 life. On Bilal's turn, he plays a forest and activates Nissa's +1, putting a Misty Rain Forest into play, and attacks Lena for 15, me for 6 in the air, and Shawn for 2, killing everyone but Lena. Lena then moves to blocks with her pests, doing 4 damage to Bilal. In his second main phase, he cracks the Misty Rainforest to get an island and casts Maelstrom Pulse, destroying all the soldier tokens on board. He then activates Una for 11, naming green, exiling 11 cards from Lena's library and making 4 fairies. On Lena's turn, she plays a Radiant Fountain, gaining 4 life, doing 2 to Bilal, casts a Venser's Journal, and then casts Tend the Pests, sacrificing the Epicure to make 5 pest tokens, triggering Professor Onyx, draining Bilal for 2, then activates Professor Onyx's -3 to make Bilal sacrifice his Noxious Gearhulk, and then activates Sap Seep Forest, gaining a life and draining Bilal again. On Bilal's turn, he activates Nissa's +1, putting a Bajuka Bog to play, exiling Lena's graveyard, and then goes to combat, attacking Lena for 22 flying damage and winning the game. Alright, so that was a pretty sweet game. Definitely tons of fun. We didn't get to see our Icatian Javelineers, unfortunately, and we did feel a little bit slow and clunky compared to the other decks, which is to be expected. We don't have a curve, we're just 1 mana spells, but we did hold up our own. We were able to stop Bilal from winning with infinite mana, which was pretty sweet. We were able to hold up a lot of interactions. We got a mana tithe off, which is a big plus in my book. So definitely interacting with the table, definitely being able to be a part of the game despite our low mana cost cards. So tons of fun as a deck. I'm sure it could use some tweaking, and if you don't have a budget, there are definitely upgrades that could be made. But I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you have any suggestions for future videos, please let me know. And also, if you want to comment, feel free. I always love reading the comments about what you guys found interesting or letting us know what mistakes we made, because I'm sure we made some mistakes. But let me know what you think, guys, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.